Broadcasting live and worldwide. Here's Brody Brazil.
March Madness. It is something I enjoy every March, obviously. And I've always felt like it is truly one of the last honest slices of college sports. What do I mean by that? Well, one example is college football. I look at the way the polls are. There's always some questions surrounding that. The bowl selection process, always some questions surrounding that. And even when the national championship came around, again, you always feel like a couple teams got cheated. There's no real way to do it right. Not to mention recruitment. That is definitely one of the biggest issues surrounding college football. It all just seems a little bit mystical. There's a lot of fog in the air when it comes to college football. But maybe basketball, it's not so much in determining a national champion, right? It used to be 64 teams. They added a few more. But it's all about the bracket. And no matter how much or how little resources individual programs have, it really comes down to being the one and only perfect team through the bracket that's going to end your season with a win. Every other team ends with a loss. In this tournament, your team ends with a win. But as I watch March Madness and as I get older over the years, I realize how built up it has become. And I just have to ask myself this question as I watch the athletes. Shouldn't they be getting something in return? Shouldn't their families at least be able to get to see these tournament games in person? Travel, airfare, hotel rooms, shouldn't that be taken care of by the schools or by the NCAA without those families having to pay for it themselves? I want you to listen to what University of Houston's head basketball coach, Kelvin Sampson, had to say about this in a press conference.
It's not money, it's travel and hotel rooms. I had one of my kids, I'm not going to mention who it is, his parents would like to come, and the only way they could come would be to drive. And then they would have to get a hotel room, possibly for, if they came in on Friday, they would be here Friday and Saturday night. For a lot of people, that's not a big deal, but that's a big deal for that family. They don't have the money to do that. So they would have to decide how they would do it. And I've had families ask me, can I sleep on my son's floor in his room? Think about that now. That's my life. That's not unusual for me. Can I sleep on his floor? Because they don't have the money to pay for a room. But when you look around at how big this industry has become, why can't we figure that out? I'm not saying give them this or give them that. I'm saying that when young men get to the NCAA tournament, let's find a way to get their parents and their brothers and sisters a plane ticket and a hotel room. I don't think that's asking too much.
All right, so let's begin the conversation with this. Times have clearly changed. Decades ago, when college sports were on a much smaller scale in financial terms and attention terms, there may have been a time where it made sense to not pay these athletes because there wasn't a ton of extra money floating around to begin with. College sports, though, as it stands right now, is more than an $8 billion per year business. Yes, $8 billion plus per year, college sports. So again, that's part of why I think times have changed. We need to reconsider this as evolution has happened, and as I'm about to get to here, college sports have in a lot of ways become the minor leagues for the four major professional sports organizations in North America. And not to exclude a couple other ones like MLS, but I'm looking here directly at MLB, NHL, NFL, and the NBA. Now for baseball, right, it has its own minor leagues, so I'm going to actually exclude baseball. And in those minor leagues, there's already issues about players not getting paid barely enough to survive with living wages during the season. So we'll cross baseball off the list. We'll also cross off hockey because the NHL rarely draws directly from college hockey programs and players going directly from NCAA to the NHL. A lot of times they go into the minor leagues, the ECHL or the American Hockey League. So I'll cross those two off. But as for the NFL and the NBA, I mean, football has the CFL up in Canada. It's got the Arena Football League, or had it. It's also got the resurgence now of the XFL and a couple different leagues over the years, but none of them have ever been top tier, right? Like none of them are ever the caliber of an NFL product. But the NCAA has still, over the years, proven to be the feeder of the top tier NFL talent. And same goes with the NBA. I mean, yes, there is a G League. Used to be the D League, now it's the G League as Gatorade sponsors it. But this G League is much more of like a practice squad reserve roster situation than it truly is, you know, honing a player's talents down in the minor leagues and then calling them up when they're ready. If they're drafted high enough, they are deemed to be ready enough to go right into the NBA. Obviously, rosters and you know, team scales are a lot smaller in basketball as opposed to football, where it's like 6 times as many guys out there. But you understand what I'm saying here. The NBA doesn't really have a true minor league developmental system. They'll say the G League is, but I'd be curious to know how many players spend a significant amount of time in that minor league and then go up to the NBA versus going straight from college, if they're good, right to the NBA. My next point here is that full rides are not full compensation for college athletes. If you're lucky enough to get a scholarship, full or partial, clearly you are a lucky and talented individual. And that compensation of a scholarship, like, it is something for sure. Don't get me wrong. I'm not minimizing it. And especially we know the cost. We know how hard it is to get into a lot of these schools. It's definitely something. But it's not nearly enough of a reward for your personal time, for your physical risk, and for your perceived image as a collegiate athlete. Let me make a comparison here. Let's talk about an airline pilot, for example. If you're an airline pilot for a major U.S. carrier, you and your immediate family members, they get to fly for free in your spare time on company airplanes, as long as there's room, right? You can't just boot somebody else and overutilize the privilege. But generally speaking, you can go anywhere you want, anytime you want for free because you work in that industry. It is clearly a perk. Those airline pilots also get paid a salary to pay for their mortgage, to take care of their families, to buy a new car, pay the bills. And I really feel like it's the same equivalent for scholarships. Full ride, partial ride, that's the icing on the cake. That should be the perk. I mean, when a school says that tuition is $35,000 a year, which is a whole nother video, by the way, that's a crazy amount of money. That might be what the market value is for that education, but is that truly what it's worth to the student, about $140,000? Again, that can't be the entire compensation for what an athlete is about to put themselves through and give themselves fully to, is just the education alone. Well, now that I've clearly stated that I think college athletes should be paid for their time and their efforts, comes the difficult question of how exactly do you do this? How do you pull something off which hasn't been done this way for decades and would come with a lot of controversy and a lot of different opinions? The way I would go about it is pretty easy. It's pretty simplistic. It would be a transition. But the most important part of my plan would be that everybody gets the exact same value. Men, women, you could be the starting football quarterback, you could be a softball pitcher, you could be a soccer bench warmer, an athlete who doesn't even barely see playing time all season long, but you fulfill the requirements, you show up to practice, you're the teammate and the player that the school asked you to be. As long as you're fulfilling that, you get the same amount as everybody else across NCAA. Now, I also want to throw this in there. I suppose it could be done differently. There could be brackets. Maybe a Division I athlete gets something a little bit more than a D2 or D3 athlete. But across the board, it would be a set amount per player per season. And by the way, if you're a multi-sport athlete, you should get double that amount per season. You should get twice as much if you play 2 sports. I know what you're thinking right now. What the heck is that amount? What amount makes sense? What amount could be executed and the schools don't go out of business? Well, let's just throw something out here, because I would speak out of turn if I for sure gave you a dollar amount that I thought I could stand behind. I'm just experimenting in the conversation here, and I will throw out the value of $5,000 per season. Again, if you play 2 sports, that's $10,000. But $5,000 per season, per player. And I'll expand on that in just a second. But you got to make this system with zero controversy, right? You can't have agents involved for individual players, and you can't have different people trying to negotiate side deals. This is the same across the board for everybody. No individual negotiations going on here. As for this money, this $5,000 hypothetically, what does it go towards? Like, if you're out there and you're not agreeing with this, you're saying, well, they shouldn't be paid. This is, they're young men and women, and this is part of paying your dues. Okay. How about just simply the quality of life, to make sure that these players' families are being taken care of, that they can go out and buy the laptop they need for school, so that they can live maybe in just a bit nicer place, so that when they're dead tired after practice and a long day of school, that they can live comfortably, they can eat healthier, they can have a social life, they can have a little bit of money to spend when they want to go out and have a good time. $5,000. And by the way, did I mention I think that $5K should also be tax-free, right? That's something you could work out with the government. If we're gonna change this with college athletes, I mean, there's gonna have to be other things that go along with it. So I think we could make it tax-free. But $5,000 tax-free, like, nobody's gonna get rich off that. But at least it does offset some things. Like I said before, quality of life being the main component here of why you want to do this. So a player that goes 4 years as a basketball athlete for a certain school is going to end up with $20,000 of cash in their pocket. If you're somebody, again, who believes in paying your dues and you'll get paid off later, I'm not so sure about that anymore. Is everybody getting drafted? Is everybody turning pro? Certainly not. So $20,000 for the individual, it's not going to make or break their life, but it is going to make their life a little bit easier. As for the schools, can they afford this? I don't know. What's $5,000 times every athlete in college sports? Is it $8 billion? I don't know. Again, I just threw that number out there, but who knows what number makes sense? But I do know that some number makes sense. And again, if you're going back to the whole scholarship thing, well, yeah, you know, these kids are getting a free education. All right, let's say your education over 4 years is worth, on the market, again, not worth to you, but worth to other people, $150,000 for 4 years of a great school. What's another 20 grand that the school can kick back to you? If they're already giving you 150 grand worth of something, and who knows how much you're making for them, what's another 20 grand of cash that they or the NCAA gives back to you? I also think that obviously, no matter where this starts, if it's 5 grand, let's say in 2020, it's not going to be, but let's say that's the number, it should go up by a certain percentage every year. It should not be still 5 grand in the year 2045. There's inflation. Everybody deserves a little bit of a raise. So again, it would have to be something set out in advance, an initial number that goes up a slight amount over the course of 10, 15 years. The business of college sports is not going away. And so I think these players should be compensated to a certain extent. But hey, let me know what you think. I'm interested to hear the public response on this, especially if you're watching on YouTube. Go ahead and comment down below. You've watched the video this long. You've listened to the podcast this long. Let me know how you're feeling about this. Also, hey, check me out on Twitter and other forms of social media like Instagram. I've been doing it for the gram a lot lately, trying to put out some of the best content. I hope you'll enjoy, as well as here on YouTube. If you like this video, thumbs up down below. Consider subscribing to the channel. Also the podcast. It's available on iTunes, Google Play, as well as Spotify. So hit a subscribe there, and I would appreciate that as well. Until next time, I'm Brody Brazil, and yes, that is my real name.